Charleston, South Carolina is a city that thrives on charm and tradition, with its cobblestone streets, historic mansions, and Spanish moss-draped oaks. But on one spring afternoon, the city's social elite were preoccupied with its timeless beauty. They were all focused on the wedding. The Thompson estate, a sprawling Georgian manor with perfectly manicured gardens, was the centerpiece of the event. Guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne under crystal chandeliers, while a live string quartet played soft classical music. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a spectacle, the social event of the year. At the heart of it all was the bride, Anna Thompson. At 26, Anna embodied Southern grace and charm, strikingly beautiful, intelligent, and beloved by everyone who met her. Today, she was marrying Michael Reynolds, a 32-year-old architect whose good looks and ambition had captured Anna's heart and her family's approval. Michael seemed like the perfect match for Anna, a man who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the wealth and prestige of the Thompsons. But beneath the layers of silk and lace, there was a tension, a whisper of something unspoken. For weeks, Anna had felt the tiniest pinpricks of doubt, moments where Michael and her stepmother, Grace, exchanged looks that lingered a second too long or seemed too familiar. Grace, at 35, was a striking woman herself, a decade younger than Anna's father, John Thompson. She had been married to him for nearly 15 years, and was the mother of 3 children, 14-year-old twins Jacob and Emily, and 10-year-old Noah. Grace had always explained that the children's father, her first husband, had died tragically years before. Anna had brushed off the doubts as paranoia. After all, the Reynolds-Thompson union was a fairy tale in the making. But fairy tales, as Anna was about to discover, often hide the darkest of secrets. It's wonderful to see you here. Before we get into the content, make sure to like the video to show your support. Also, I'd love to hear about your home country. Now, let's keep the video rolling. It happened in the most mundane way. Anna had offered to help Grace get ready, a final bonding moment between stepmother and stepdaughter. Grace's room, always impeccably tidy, smelled faintly of lavender as Anna zipped up her dress and adjusted the veil. While Grace stepped into the bathroom to check her makeup, Anna's gaze wandered to an antique armoire in the corner of the room. The door was slightly ajar, revealing the edge of a leather-bound photo album. Normally, Anna wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something about the album seemed out of place. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she pulled it out. As she flipped through the pages, the early photographs seemed innocent enough. Grace in her 20s, smiling on a beach, holding a toddler. But then Anna turned to a page that made her breath catch in her throat. There, staring back at her, was a younger version of Michael Reynolds. His arm was draped casually around Grace's shoulders, and in his other hand he held a newborn baby. Beneath the photo, written in Grace's familiar cursive, was a single sentence that made Anna's stomach lurch. Michael meeting his firstborn. Anna froze, her mind racing. This can't be real. This has to be a mistake. She flipped through the rest of the album frantically, her hands trembling. Photo after photo showed Michael with Grace and the children at various stages of their lives. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. Michael wasn't just her fiancé. He was also the father of her stepmother's 3 children. Her head spinning, Anna barely registered Grace returning to the room. When Grace saw what Anna was holding, her face drained of color. She reached for the album, but Anna pulled it away, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "What is this?" Anna demanded, holding up the photo. "Why is Michael in these pictures, and why does it say he's their father?" Grace hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the words. It's not what you think," she stammered. "Then explain it," Anna shot back, her voice rising. "Explain this." Finally, Grace sat down on the edge of the bed, her carefully composed demeanor crumbling. "It's true," she whispered. "Michael is their father, but I swear I didn't want you to find out like this." The room spun as Anna tried to process the revelation. Her perfect wedding, her perfect fiancé, her perfect life, all of it was a lie. As the guests outside laughed and toasted to the happy couple, Anna's world began to unravel. In just a few hours she would walk down the aisle, not knowing whether to confront the man she thought she loved or bury the truth for the sake of her family's reputation. But one thing was clear, this wedding was no fairy tale. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Anna stood frozen in Grace's bedroom, clutching the photo album as if it might vanish in her hands. The truth screamed at her from the faded pages, but she couldn't believe it. Her chest felt tight, her vision blurred, and her legs wavered beneath her. Just hours earlier, her life had felt like a dream. A beautiful dress, a charming fiancé, and a future filled with promise. Now she wasn't even sure what was real anymore. Grace reached for the album again, her hands trembling. "Anna, please let me explain," she pleaded. But Anna took a step back, her voice rising. "Explain? Explain how my fiancé is the father of your children. Explain why you've been lying to my father and to me for years." She didn't wait for an answer, her anger bubbling over into a frantic stream of questions. "Did you know he was dating me? Did you plan this? Were you hoping I'd never find out?" Grace's carefully composed demeanor shattered. Tears welled in her eyes as she sat on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what happened back then." "Then make me understand," Anna snapped, throwing the album onto the bed between them. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to all of us." Grace hesitated, her lips trembling as she struggled to find the words. Finally she looked up, her face pale and drawn. "Michael and we were together a long time ago. I was young, and he was different then. When I found out I was pregnant, he wasn't ready to be a father. He left. He walked away from me and the kids before Jacob and Emily were even a year old." Anna shook her head, her mind racing. "So you married my father. What, for financial security? To cover for Michael?" "No," Grace insisted, though the truth in her eyes betrayed her. "I loved your father, or at least, I grew to love him. He gave me a chance to start over, to give my children the kind of life they deserved. And I never thought I'd see Michael again. But then you started dating him. I didn't know it was him at first. I didn't even know he'd come back to Charleston. And when I realized..." She broke off, her voice faltering. Anna's stomach churned as the pieces clicked into place. Grace's nervous glances, Michael's subtle evasions whenever Anna mentioned her family. It all made sense now. "How long have you known?" Anna demanded. "How long have you been keeping this from me?" "Since the engagement," Grace admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I thought, maybe it wouldn't matter, that we could all move forward." "Move forward?" Anna's voice cracked with disbelief. "You're telling me that my fiancé, the man I was supposed to spend my life with, is not only the father of your children, but the same man who abandoned you, and you thought we could just move forward?" Grace stood up, reaching for Anna's hands, but Anna pulled away. "I didn't want to hurt you," Grace said desperately. "Or your father. I thought I was protecting you, protecting all of us." But Anna wasn't listening. Her heart pounded in her chest as anger and betrayal surged through her veins. "Protecting us? You've destroyed us." Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Anna didn't stop moving until she reached the far end of the estate, where the wedding preparations were in full swing. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of the life she thought she was about to begin. Rows of white chairs facing a flower-covered altar, servers bustling with trays of hors d'oeuvres, family and friends laughing and toasting to the happy couple. It all felt like a cruel joke now. She found Michael in the chapel, standing near the altar with his back to her. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his face lighting up with a smile that faded the moment he saw her expression. "Anna," he said, taking a step toward her. "What's wrong?" She didn't even give him a chance to guess. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you lie to me?" Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Grace, about Jacob, Emily, and Noah, about how you're their father." The color drained from Michael's face. For a moment he seemed frozen, caught between fight and flight. "Anna," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't you dare try to deny it," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. I saw the pictures. Grace told me everything. Michael exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Okay, he said finally. Yes, it's true. I'm their father, but it's not what you think. Not what I think. Anna's voice rose. You've been lying to me this whole time, to my father, to everyone, and now you're telling me it's not what I think. Michael took a step closer, his expression earnest. I didn't know, Anna. I didn't know they were mine until a few months ago. Grace didn't tell me. I swear I never wanted this to happen. Anna laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. You didn't want this to happen? You didn't want me to find out, you mean? No, Michael insisted. I didn't want to hurt you. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. You didn't know how. Anna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You didn't know how to tell me that you had 3 children with my stepmother, that you abandoned them and then came back to play house with me. How do you even begin to explain something like that? Michael reached for her, but she stepped back, her voice trembling with finality. I can't do this. I can't marry you. Anna, please, Michael begged. I love you. I've made mistakes, but I love you. Don't let this ruin everything we've built. But it was already ruined. Anna could feel it in the hollow ache in her chest, in the way her once bright future now felt like ashes. She shook her head, her voice breaking. It's over, Michael. As she turned and walked away, the wedding that had once been the highlight of Charleston's social calendar began to unravel. Piece by piece. The grand chapel at the Thompson estate was a vision of perfection. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the polished marble floors. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, each adorned with ivory ribbons and fragrant roses. The guests, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes, mingled and chatted, sipping champagne as they waited for the ceremony to begin. But in the quiet of the empty altar, away from the laughter and music, Anna's world was crumbling. She found herself standing just inside the chapel's ornate double doors, staring at the man she had thought she would spend the rest of her life with. Michael stood near the altar, adjusting his cufflinks with a calm confidence that made Anna's blood boil. How could he look so composed, so casual, when her entire life was unraveling because of him? Michael, she said sharply, her voice echoing through the empty space. He turned, startled to see her. His expression quickly shifted to one of concern when he noticed the look on her face, anger, betrayal, heartbreak, all rolled into one. Anna, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Don't act like you don't know, Anna said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. She stepped closer, gripping the back of a pew for support. Grace told me everything, about Jacob, Emily, Noah, about how you're their father. Michael's face went pale. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing as though he were trying to formulate a response. Anna, you knew, she interrupted, her voice rising. You knew, and you didn't say a word. You've been lying to me this entire time. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? How betrayed I feel? I didn't lie to you, Michael said quickly, his tone defensive. I didn't know they were mine until recently. Grace didn't tell me. Don't you dare put this all on her, Anna shot back, her eyes flashing. You had a relationship with her. You left her when she was pregnant with your children, and then you came back into her life, into my life, without ever saying a word about it. How is that not a lie? Michael took a step closer, his hands outstretched as though trying to calm her. I swear, Anna, I didn't know. When I started dating you, I had no idea Grace was your stepmother. By the time I realized, it was already too late. I didn't know how to tell you. Too late for what? Anna demanded, her voice cracking. Too late to be honest with me? Too late to stop this train wreck before it started? Michael looked pained, his brow furrowing deeply. I love you, Anna, he said, his voice soft and pleading. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I could just keep the past in the past, we could move forward, build a life together. Anna laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Move forward? With what, Michael? A marriage built on lies. Did you think I'd never find out? That Grace would keep your secret forever? Michael hesitated, and Anna saw the guilt written all over his face. I was going to tell you, he said finally. After the wedding, I I didn't want to ruin everything. You didn't want to ruin everything, Anna repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. You already have. You've ruined everything, Michael. My trust in you, my family, my future, all of it. How could you do this to me? Michael's shoulders slumped, his hands falling to his sides. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? Anna's voice cracked with anger and grief. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. You were hiding, Michael, hiding from your mistakes, your responsibilities. You don't get to call that love. The chapel was silent except for the sound of Anna's ragged breathing. Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. Anna, he said softly, please, don't do this. Don't throw everything away because of mistakes I made years ago. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Can't we find a way to get past this? Anna stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. She wanted to believe him, to believe that love could conquer anything. But as she looked into his eyes, all she saw was a man who had lied to her, who had built their entire relationship on a foundation of secrets and deceit. No, she said finally, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. I can't marry you. I won't marry you. Michael stepped toward her, but Anna held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. Don't, she said, her voice trembling. Don't make this harder than it already is. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Michael looked as though he wanted to argue, to plead with her one last time, but he stayed silent. He knew, as well as Anna did, that there was no coming back from this. Anna reached down and slipped the engagement ring off her finger. For a moment, she stared at it, the symbol of everything she had believed in, everything that had now been shattered. Then she placed it on the altar and turned to leave. As she walked back down the aisle, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty chapel, she felt a mixture of devastation and relief. She had just destroyed the life she thought she wanted, but she had also reclaimed her dignity. Outside, the wedding guests were beginning to murmur. The ceremony was already running late, and whispers of speculation rippled through the crowd. But Anna didn't care. She had bigger problems than the gossip of Charleston's social elite. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This wedding was over, and so it seemed was her relationship with Michael. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the Thompson estate, casting a golden glow over the perfectly manicured lawns and the garden where the wedding reception was supposed to take place. But inside the main house, the air was charged with tension. Anna had barely stepped inside when she heard her father's voice booming from the parlor. Where is Michael? John Thompson demanded, pacing the room like a man on the verge of explosion. His neatly tailored suit was still impeccable, but his tie hung loosely around his neck, a rare sign of disarray for the typically composed businessman. The guests are waiting, and I can't get a straight answer from anyone. What's going on? Anna stood frozen in the doorway, her throat dry and her heart racing. She had stormed out of the chapel, leaving Michael behind, but now she realized the inevitable. She would have to tell her father the truth. Before she could speak, Grace entered the room, her face pale and her movements hesitant. She looked at John with a mix of fear and resolve, knowing the storm she was about to unleash. John, she said softly, we need to talk. John turned to her, his eyes narrowing. What is it? Do you know what's going on? Why is Anna upset? And where the hell is Michael? Grace glanced at Anna, who was standing silently in the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. It was clear that Anna wasn't ready to say the words, so Grace took a deep breath and stepped forward. It's about Michael, she began, her voice trembling. What about him? John asked, his tones sharp. Grace hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. There's something I've been keeping from you, from everyone. Michael, he's the father of my children. For a moment, the room was silent. John stared at Grace, the words not quite registering. Then his face contorted with disbelief and anger. What did you just say? Grace's voice broke as she repeated herself. Michael is Jacob, Emily, and Noah's father. I met him years before I met you. We were together, and when I got pregnant, he left. I never thought I'd see him again, but when Anna brought him into our lives, I didn't know what to do. I was trying to protect our family. Protect our family? John's voice was rising now, dangerously close to shouting. You've been lying to me for years, Grace. You married me, let me raise those kids as if they were mine, all while keeping this from me. And now you want to stand there and talk about protecting our family. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she shook her head. I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, and I didn't know Michael would come back into our lives this way. I thought it wouldn't matter. It does matter, John bellowed, his voice echoing through the room. You've humiliated me. You've humiliated Anna. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Anna finally found her voice, stepping into the room. Dad, she said softly, it's not just Grace. Michael knew. He knew for months, and he didn't tell me. He didn't tell any of us. He let me believe we had a future together, and all along he was lying. John's fists clenched at his sides, his face turning red with fury. Where is he? He demanded. Where's that bastard? He's still at the chapel, Anna said, her voice trembling. Without another word, John stormed past her, heading for the door. Grace tried to stop him, grabbing his arm, but he shook her off. Don't touch me, he snapped. You've done enough damage. John, please, Grace begged. Don't do anything you'll regret. But John didn't respond. He was already out the door, leaving Grace and Anna behind, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Let's take a quick break to chat. What are your thoughts on the case we're diving into today? If you're enjoying the story, leave a 1 in the comments. If it didn't resonate with you, drop a 0. I'd love to hear your insights, so share them below. Thank you for sticking around. Your support means the world and helps me bring you new content every day. After John's dramatic exit, Anna and Grace were left standing in silence. The weight of the truth had finally come crashing down, and there was no going back. Grace sank into a chair, her head in her hands, while Anna paced the room, her thoughts racing. The more she thought about it, the more questions she had. How had Grace and Michael managed to keep this secret for so long? And why had Michael chosen to stay silent, even after learning the truth? I don't understand. Anna said finally, her voice tight with anger. You said you wanted to protect the family, but how could you think keeping this a secret would help? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Grace looked up at her, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't know what else to do, she said softly. When Michael came back into our lives, I was terrified. I knew it would destroy everything if the truth came out. Destroy everything, Anna repeated, her voice rising. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to lie. And Michael, God, I can't believe I ever trusted him. Grace hesitated, then said, There's something else, something I need to tell you. Anna stopped pacing, her heart sinking. What now? Grace hesitated again, as if summoning the courage to speak. Michael and we talked a few weeks ago. He told me he was thinking about leaving Charleston. He wanted to take the kids and start over somewhere else. He said he didn't want to hurt you, but he didn't think he could stay here. Anna stared at her stepmother in disbelief. So he was just going to leave me? After everything? I don't know, Grace admitted. He said he wasn't sure. But I could tell he was serious. He wanted to fix things with the kids, to be a father to them. I think that's why he stayed silent for so long. He was trying to figure out what to do. The words hit Anna like a punch to the gut. Not only had Michael lied to her, but he had been planning to abandon her entirely. The man she thought she loved wasn't just flawed. He was a coward. Anna didn't know how long she stood there, staring at Grace and trying to make sense of everything. But before she could say anything else, a loud noise interrupted her thoughts. It was the unmistakable sound of shouting, John's voice, booming from somewhere outside. Anna and Grace exchanged a panicked glance before rushing to the window. From their vantage point, they could see John in the garden, facing off with Michael. The tension was palpable, even from a distance. Dad, Anna whispered, fear creeping into her voice. She turned to Grace, her eyes wide. We have to stop him. But Grace was already moving, her face pale with fear. Together they ran out of the house, desperate to prevent what felt like an inevitable disaster. The garden, once the picturesque backdrop for Charleston's wedding of the year, was now the stage for a confrontation that would alter the Thompson family forever. The soft hum of cicadas was drowned out by the sound of John's furious voice echoing through the air. Anna and Grace ran as fast as they could across the sprawling lawn, their heels sinking into the grass with every hurried step. From a distance, they could see John standing in the middle of the garden, his shoulders squared and his fists clenched. Opposite him, Michael stood with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. "Dad," Anna called out, her voice trembling. But John didn't turn. His focus was locked solely on Michael. "You think you can just walk into my family and destroy everything I've built?" John bellowed, his voice shaking with fury. "You lied to my daughter. You lied to me, and now you expect me to stand here and listen to your excuses?" Michael took a cautious step back, his hands still raised. "John, I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice calm but strained. "I made mistakes, I know that, but I love Anna, and I never wanted to hurt her." "Love?" John spat the word like it was poison. "Don't you dare talk to me about love. A man who loves my daughter doesn't lie to her. He doesn't keep secrets that tear a family apart. You've been a coward your entire life, and now you've ruined mine." Grace finally caught up, breathless and panicked. "John, please," she said, stepping forward. "Let's go back inside and talk about this. This isn't the way to handle it." But John didn't even glance at her. "Stay out of this, Grace," he said coldly. "You've done enough." Anna, her chest heaving from the run, stood frozen a few feet away. She wanted to intervene, to calm her father, but the sheer intensity of his anger kept her rooted in place. "John," Michael said carefully, his tone desperate, "I'm not trying to excuse what I did, but Grace and that was years ago. I've changed. I didn't come back to hurt anyone. I came back because I love Anna." "Don't say her name," John snapped, his voice low and menacing. "You don't deserve to speak her name." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say another word, John reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Anna's heart stop. An antique pistol. "Dad, no!" Anna screamed, her voice piercing through the night. Michael's eyes widened as he took another step back, his hands raised higher. "John, put the gun down," he said quickly. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I think I do," John said, his voice eerily calm now. "You've taken everything from me, my wife, my family, my dignity. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be humiliated like this? To be betrayed by the people you trusted most?" Grace stepped forward again, her hands outstretched. "John, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't the answer. You'll ruin everything." John turned his head slightly to look at her, and in that brief moment of distraction, Michael tried to move. But John saw the movement out of the corner of his eye and whipped the gun back around. "Don't," John warned, his voice like steel. "Don't move." Michael froze, his face pale and his breathing ragged. "John, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But this isn't the way to fix it. Think about Anna. Think about your family." "My family?" John's voice cracked with emotion. "You think I have a family left, after what you and Grace have done?" Before anyone could respond, the sound of a gunshot shattered the night. Anna screamed, the noise reverberating through her chest like a physical blow. Michael staggered backward, clutching his chest, his expression one of shock and disbelief. He collapsed to the ground, the pristine grass beneath him quickly staining red. Grace let out a blood-curdling scream and ran to Michael, dropping to her knees beside him. "Michael," she sobbed, shaking him as if willing him to wake up. But John wasn't done. His hand still gripped the gun, his face twisted with rage and despair. "You ruined everything," he muttered, his voice barely audible now. He raised the gun again, this time aiming it at Grace. "Dad, stop!" Anna cried, running toward him. But it was too late. Another shot rang out, and Grace slumped forward, collapsing next to Michael. John stood there, his hand trembling as the gun fell to his side. The rage in his eyes was gone now, replaced by a hollow emptiness. He looked down at the two bodies on the ground, his expression unreadable. Anna reached him, grabbing his arm. "Dad, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. John didn't respond. He simply sank to his knees, dropping the gun as he buried his face in his hands. The sound of distant sirens broke through the silence, growing louder with every passing second. The wedding guests who had heard the gunshots were now gathered at the edge of the garden, their faces pale with shock and horror. Anna knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face as the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the estate. The once beautiful garden was now a chaotic crime scene. Red and blue lights painted the manicured hedges and elegant fountains, clashing violently with the tranquil setting. Uniformed officers swarmed the area, cordoning off the scene with yellow tape as paramedics hurried to check for signs of life. But there was nothing they could do. Michael and Grace were pronounced dead on the scene, their lifeless bodies lying side by side on the blood-stained grass. Anna stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the paramedics cover the bodies with white sheets. She felt numb, as if she were watching the scene unfold from outside her own body. Her father sat on the ground nearby, his hands cuffed behind his back. His once impeccable suit was now wrinkled and stained with dirt, and his face was a mask of blank despair. He didn't resist when the officers led him away, his head hanging low. "Miss Thompson," a detective said gently, approaching Anna, "we're going to need to ask you some questions." Anna nodded mutely, her throat too dry to speak. She allowed herself to be led to a bench near the edge of the garden, where she sat and tried to piece together what had just happened. The detective, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a notebook in hand, sat across from her. "I know this is difficult," he said softly, "but I need you to tell me what happened tonight." Anna took a shaky breath, her mind racing as she tried to organize her thoughts. "It all started this morning," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found out about Michael and Grace, about the children. I called off the wedding, and then everything spiraled out of control." She recounted the events as best she could, her voice breaking as she described her father pulling the gun and the shots that followed. The detective listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he closed his notebook and nodded. "Thank you, Miss Thompson. I know this isn't easy, but you've been very helpful." As he stood to leave, Anna finally found the courage to ask the question that had been gnawing at her since the moment the gunshots rang out. "What's going to happen to my father?" The detective paused, his expression somber. "That'll be up to the courts," he said, "but based on what you've told me and the evidence we've gathered so far, it's unlikely this will be seen as anything other than second-degree murder." Anna nodded numbly, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. She turned her gaze back to the garden, where the once vibrant scene of her wedding day now felt like a graveyard for her family's future. As the night wore on and the last of the wedding guests were escorted away, Anna sat alone on the bench, staring at the ruins of what should have been the happiest day of her life. She didn't know how she would move forward, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The Thompson estate, once the pinnacle of elegance and prestige in Charleston, was now a full-fledged crime scene. Investigators combed the garden and house for evidence, their movements precise and methodical. Flashlights swept over blood-stained grass, and cameras clicked to capture every detail of the scene. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, sealing off the garden where 2 lives had been lost in a matter of seconds. Detective Robert Hayes, the lead investigator, stood near the altar that had been meant for Anna and Michael's vows. Instead of exchanging rings and promises of forever, the couple's relationship had imploded under the weight of secrets. Hayes took a deep breath, surveying the chaos before him. As a veteran detective with over 20 years of experience, he had seen his fair share of family tragedies, but something about this case felt particularly unsettling. The testimonies from Anna, Grace, and the wedding guests painted a grim picture of betrayal and simmering resentment that had boiled over into violence. Hayes' team quickly pieced together the basics. John Thompson, humiliated and enraged after discovering the truth about his wife's affair and his daughter's fiancé, had confronted Michael in the garden. The confrontation escalated, and John shot both Michael and Grace in what appeared to be a fit of blind rage. But as the investigation continued, deeper layers of deceit began to emerge. Hayes sat at his desk the following morning, poring over the evidence that had been collected. His team had recovered John's antique pistol, the murder weapon, along with his fingerprints and gunpowder residue on his hands. But there was more. A forensic accountant on Hayes' team uncovered years' worth of financial irregularities in Grace's accounts. Bank statements showed that Grace had been transferring significant sums of money from John's personal and business accounts into a private account under her name. She had funneled nearly $250,000 over the course of 5 years. Digging deeper, investigators discovered where the money had gone. Grace had been financially supporting Michael in secret. Emails and text messages between Grace and Michael revealed a shocking plan. The two had been plotting to leave Charleston with the children after the wedding. Michael would leave Anna, and Grace would leave John, taking what was left of his fortune to start a new life together. They had even scoped out properties in North Carolina, far from the watchful eyes of Charleston's social circles. Hayes couldn't shake the sense that John had known more than he had let on. Investigators found a notebook in John's home office filled with detailed notes about Grace and Michael's relationship. Receipts, photos, and handwritten observations suggested that John had been tracking their movements for weeks. "It looks premeditated," Hayes said, sliding the notebook across the table to his team. "This wasn't just a crime of passion. John knew what was happening, and he waited for the right moment to confront them." Anna, who had been called back to the station to review the evidence, stared at the notebook in disbelief. "He was tracking them?" she asked, her voice shaking. Hayes nodded. "It seems like he suspected something for a while. He just didn't know how far it went until the wedding day." Anna felt her stomach turn as she looked at the photos of Michael and Grace. Every detail of her life for the past 2 years had been a lie. She had loved Michael, trusted Grace, and believed in the stability of her family. Now she was left with nothing but the wreckage of their betrayal. The trial of John Thompson captivated the nation, becoming a media spectacle almost overnight. Headlines like "Betrayal and Bloodshed at Charleston Wedding" and "From Vows to Violence, the Thompson Family Tragedy" dominated the news. The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and friends of the family, all eager to witness the fallout from the explosive events. The prosecution painted John as a cold-blooded killer who had planned the murders of Grace and Michael well in advance. They highlighted the notebook found in his office as evidence of premeditation, arguing that John had deliberately lured Michael into the garden and shot him in a calculated act of revenge. This was not a moment of passion, the lead prosecutor declared during closing arguments. This was a meticulously planned act of violence fueled by humiliation and betrayal. The defense, however, portrayed John as a broken man pushed to the brink by unimaginable deceit. Witnesses testified to his character as a devoted father and husband who had been blindsided by the revelation of Grace and Michael's betrayal. "This is not the story of a cold-blooded killer," the defense attorney said. "This is the story of a man who was destroyed by the people he trusted most. He acted in a moment of emotional devastation, not out of malice or premeditation." The most emotional moment of the trial came when Anna took the stand. Dressed in black, she recounted the events leading up to the murders in heartbreaking detail. Her voice cracked as she described her father's fury, Michael's pleas, and the sound of the gunshots that shattered her life. "I lost everything that day," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My fiancé, my stepmother, and my father. I'll never forget what happened, but I also know my dad wasn't himself. He was broken." The jury deliberated for 3 days before delivering their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. John was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice served, while others viewed John as a tragic figure who had been pushed too far. In the months following the trial, the Thompson estate was sold. The once grand home that had been the site of so many joyous occasions now felt haunted by tragedy. Anna left Charleston, unable to face the constant reminders of what she had lost. She moved to a small city in the Midwest, far from the whispers and gossip that had followed her everywhere. There, she started fresh, working for a nonprofit organization that supported victims of domestic betrayal and family trauma. Her story became a cautionary tale, one she shared publicly to help others navigate the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. "I learned the hard way that the truth always comes out," Anna said during a televised interview. "And when it does, it can destroy everything in its path. But it's also the first step toward healing." John adjusted to life in prison, where he spent his days reading, writing letters to Anna, and reflecting on the choices that had led to his downfall. He maintained a complicated relationship with his daughter, who visited him once a year but struggled to reconcile her love for him with the pain he had caused. Charleston moved on, as cities do, but the story of the Thompson wedding lingered, retold in hushed tones at social gatherings and dissected in true crime documentaries. It became a symbol of how betrayal, unchecked emotions, and long-hidden secrets can unravel even the most seemingly perfect lives. In the final scene of the documentary, Anna stands in front of a modest home in her new city, holding a framed photo of herself and her father from years before. She gazes at it for a moment before placing it on a shelf. "Life doesn't go back to the way it was," she says softly. "But you learn to keep going. You find a way to rebuild. And you never forget the lessons you've learned." As the screen fades to black, the words appear, dedicated to the victims of secrets and the families left to pick up the pieces.